Hour 3 of Overdrive, kicking off on TSN 1050, the TSN app. We're now on TSN 2. Mark Rowe sitting in for Brian Hayes alongside Dave Feschuk from the Toronto Star. Mike Ferrin from MLB Network Radio will be joining us in a couple of minutes as the AllStar game gets underway in Arlington, Texas tonight. Home Run Derby went last night. Paul Skenes is the name and the superstar that everyone is talking about over the last couple of months. The guy going first overall a year ago and not just making the transition to the majors, but and he deserves it. He is the starting pitcher for the National League, and he's in the Cy Young conversation, and he'll be pitching up against an American League team that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. will be batting seventh. A lot of people focused on the fact that Aaron Judge is batting fourth.
Yes.
Because everyone wants to see Skenes versus Judge, and if Skenes gets a 3-up, 3-down inning, we won't see it because he's only going to pitch an inning.
Yeah, that's, you can criticize baseball for a lot of things, but like that points to them not getting it, right? Like, so if you're Rob Manfred, if you're a good at the game guy,
you might throw
that
robot umpire and say there's a walk involved.
No, you're like, are you not just demanding? Like, I know Bruce Bochy's managing this team, but Bruce, you're not putting Aaron Judge anywhere but the top three.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't care if he leads off. I don't care if he's second. I don't care if he's third, but he is facing Paul Skenes tonight.
Yeah.
Like, there's no conversation.
It's the matchup everyone wants to see.
That's what I mean. Why wouldn't you give it to them?
And in a sport that has struggled with their stars, like we always go back to Mike Trout, best player in baseball for 5 or 6 years running, and no one could pick him out on a street. If he walked down Times Square, no one would stop him. And you have it with Aaron Judge. It helps that he plays with the Yankees. You have it with Shohei Otani, certainly globally.
Yeah.
And you have it now with Paul Skenes, who's playing in a small market, but it doesn't matter because of just the phenomenon that he's become. And so you want to see those battles. I know it's a team sport, but like that, if you have the 1 versus 1, that's something that people will actually talk about for an All-Star game that most people don't seem to talk about.
Exactly.
Days later.
Like, you've been getting criticized because the All-Star games are relevant. It's not worth watching. Here was a moment you could create, with no real intervention other than, Bruce, please make sure that Aaron Judge bats in the first inning against this guy because we need to see this.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I guess baseball's baseball, but, it is what it is. Maybe there's somebody saying you can't tell the manager what to do, but it makes no sense to me, Weiss. And all we can hope for is that somebody gets on and Judge gets up against Skenes but what are the odds somebody gets on against Skenes? This guy has been lights out. Like, he's never had a loss in his career.
It's wild.
11 starts, 2 of them hitless. I mean, think about this. This guy is incredible. He's throwing 100. He's got the social media influencer girlfriend that everybody seems to love, Livy Dunn.
Yeah, gymnast.
I mean, power couple supreme. Like, it's what baseball needs. It's what any sports league would want. It's like a mini kind of Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift situation.
Yeah.
Nobody's as big as Taylor Swift. I'm not suggesting anything of the sort, but this Livy Dunn certainly has more Instagram followers than any MLB player does.
Well, it's injected, interest into a baseball season that is, it's always going to be long because it's 162 games. And there's a younger demographic that cares about a single player. Like, I don't know how many kids are talking about Shohei Otani. A few, but I think that, like, for Skenes, for a guy who has not done nearly, what Shohei Otani has done in his major league career, I feel like has grabbed that demographic much more than any player that we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And it's obviously because he's a phenom on the field, but he's interesting off the field, right?
Yeah.
And he's relatable off the field. And so it's a dream scenario. And let's just hope he faces Aaron Judge. I mean, I'm sure it'll like, this guy is something to watch no matter who he's facing. Don't get me wrong. Like that one-on-one he had with Shohei Otani earlier in the season where he struck out Otani in the first at-bat and then Otani went yard in the second at-bat.
Yeah.
Like, that was must-watch.
And that's what
TV.
had people talking.
Exactly.
With more on the Midsummer Classic and the second half of the baseball's regular season, Mike Ferrin from MLB Network Radio joins us now. Mike, good to chat with you. Thanks for taking some time to join us here on OverDrive. We were talking, as everyone else has been talking, about Paul Skenes starting for the National League, and the fact that we all want to see him go up against Aaron Judge, who is batting fourth for the American League. Are you kind of in that same camp that you're just hoping that at least someone walks or gets a single off of Skenes so that this actually happens?
No, I'm just ticked at Bruce Bochy for not hitting Judge in one of the first three spots in the order to guarantee it, right? I'm super excited about the prospects of it. I mean, I've been fortunate enough because I do a lot of college baseball stuff to see Paul Skenes a lot over the last 2 years and to watch his growth. And I don't think any of us could have ever predicted that he would be starting the All-Star game just over a year after he was drafted. So, yeah, I think this is must-watch TV. I agree with you guys. I think this is going to be super exciting. I hope he gets a chance to face Judge. It'd be a little bit like when Otani faced Fernandez Tatis Jr. In the first inning of the All-Star game against back in Colorado 3 years ago. So, yeah, this is super exciting tonight. Anything that can kind of raise the Q factor for the All-Star game, I'm all in favor of, and this should be a great matchup.
Is there any chance, Joe, that if it is 3 up, 3 down in the first inning, which, let's face it, the odds are with a guy throwing 100 with the command that Skenes has, it probably will be 3 up, 3 down. Is there any chance they leave him in for one more pitch or one more batter in the second, or do you think that's out of the question?
No, I think he's going to be one inning and that's it. I think that's what the Pirates have requested. I think that's probably what's best for him. And I think knowing Torey Lovello as well as I do, I think he's going to be very, very respectful of what the team's wishes are in all of these. So I think Skenes is going to throw the first inning. It's going to be must-see TV, and then we're going to have to watch the other great players play for the next day.
Mike, I don't want to be disrespectful at all to Aaron Judge and Shohei Otani and the other stars in this league, but how important has it been for Major League Baseball to have this young guy come into the league and do what he's doing and have a fan base and a younger fan base talk about the game in the middle of a season that's 162 games?
Yeah, I think I would take it less from the, what does it mean for MLB overall and more from the what does it mean for this event, right? Because, I think we can probably agree, right, whether baseball is your favorite sport or not, that of the 4 major North American professional sports, it's definitely the All-Star game that looks the most like the regular season, right? And so I think from that standpoint, having some buzz that's generated about an event where that has probably lost some of its luster because we just have access to seeing all of these players on a nightly basis, whether it's through, television subscriptions or just the fact that we watch a lot more baseball. There's a lot more that's consumable. We have had interleague play for 30 years now, and so we have teams playing everybody and playing everybody every year now. So that kind of takes away some of what was the mystique of the All-Star game. But Skenes brings a lot of that back because not everybody has seen him. And he's kind of has still these mythic qualities to him for casual fans that they've heard about this incredible phenom. And now they get to see him, on the biggest stage, face the best hitters. So I think less for what it means for MLB overall and more for what it means for this night, it's pretty significant because it means that the All-Star game can still have those moments with some big juice in it, right? Like those moments where you really want to see these, superstars square off. It's kind of a shame it's not 1980 and we're not going to see him go 3 innings and face all of the stars. But at the same time, this is still great that we get to see the sport, put in the spotlight, and specifically the matchups that he has tonight in the spotlight. And I have a feeling he's going to show well. The moment is not going to be too big for this guy.
Hey, Mike, when you look at, the history of pitching and especially the recent history of power pitching, you look at a guy throwing 100 and you're always kind of bracing, like when's the arm injury going to come, right? But I've been reading a lot about him and talking to people about him in the sort of the sports strength and conditioning community. And there does seem to be a feeling like he's doing all the right things, right? He's got this incredible routine. He's throwing footballs. He's throwing softballs. He's doing plyo work. He's doing band work. I don't know what you've seen in terms of how he's sort of trying to fight off what almost inevitably hits every power pitcher. But what do you think of his chances of staying healthy, despite the fact he's 6'6", 235, and throws bullets?
Yeah, I mean, I think he can do everything that he can to try and protect himself, to try and stay healthy. And we have to be cognizant of the fact in the back of our mind that it still may not matter, because throwing a baseball is extremely dangerous to the health and well-being of the people who do it professionally, right? Mm. So, I mean, I think it's cool if he's able to stay healthy. Maybe there are some techniques that we can learn from him that other pitchers will be able to follow. Maybe it'll just be great genetics. But I try to stay away from that. You know, I remember when Steven Strasburg debuted, right? And I was at his debut. I was just telling the story the other day. You know, being there, seeing the electricity. You know, that was the most anticipated debut for a pitching prospect before Skenes. And he was so dominant for a short amount of time. And then by August, he was out with Tommy John surgery, right? And that's a guy that hadn't really had health problems either. So I would say, rather than worry about what's to come, because the tendency for every pitcher is, and I mean, you guys see it with the Jays too, right? Pitchers get hurt. It's going to happen to a lot of them. It won't happen to everyone, but let's just enjoy every start that we get out of them, whether it's another 2, 10, or 200, or 300, who knows? You know, I think all of that is something that we just can't control. And I think to some degree, Paul Skenes can control what he can control, and that's about it. You have to remember, he's a really diligent worker, and so anything that he's doing for preventative maintenance, he's doing to the nth degree. Before he was at LSU, he was at the Air Force Academy, and that is something that he really has that kind of militaristic discipline in the way he goes about things. So he's going to do everything in his power. Hopefully it's enough, because if he can be that starting pitcher that eschews all of the injury stuff and that for the next decade plus we're watching, I would be super excited about that.
Mike Ferrin, MLB Network radio host, joining us on Overdrive. You brought up the Blue Jays, and they, well, it's been a frustrating year, to say the least, Mike. They're a team that's 9.5 games out of a wild card spot, and yet their farm system is ranked in the lower third of all of Major League Baseball. How much are they going to be on your radar moving towards the trade deadline as they try to kind of, it sounds like they're trying to do both and be relevant in the moment and try to be competitive, but also try to restock their farm system?
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to make the playoffs. I think at this point it's pretty safe to say that that's not going to happen. So the question is then, what's the next goal? Is it to go back at it in 25 with largely the same crew? Or is it, do we see a more protracted rebuild? And my guess is that they're going to try and go back at it in 25. As much as a lot of the U.S. media has tried to focus on, Vlad Guerrero Jr. and Bichette as trade candidates, I don't buy it. I think there's still, the Jays, we haven't even really seen them make their run at extending them yet. And I think they're going to try to, because I just don't think you're going to end up being able to replace those players. I know Bichette has had a rotten season, but he's a better player than this. But they have, half a dozen free agents that are, attractive trade candidates. I know Trevor Richards' last 5 outings haven't been very good, but, he's got a long track record of being a pretty solid reliever. Jimmy Garcia, when he comes back after the AllStar break, is a guy that other teams are going to want. Yusei Kikuchi has thrown the ball really well, the 5th inning Sunday notwithstanding. He's been very good. I think Justin Turner probably still has some value. Maybe Danny Jansen, if they don't decide that he's another guy that they'd like to try and extend, just because you can always use depth at catcher. I'm not sure what Kevin Kiermaier will bring because of the amount of money that's left on his deal, but those are the guys that I think are going to be the focus. And I think they're right to try and go back at it again. I mean, they have most of that rotation under contract next year. I think they have guys that are pretty good candidates or bounce back. I think on the offensive end, there are certainly some things that they can adjust to try and make it better. They need some different personnel to try and make this a better offense. But they also had a ton of bad luck in the bullpen, whether it be injuries or ineffectiveness that you just couldn't see coming. Could you guys have predicted that Tim Meza was all of a sudden going to turn into a pumpkin? I mean, based on the way that guy pitched the last 4 years, I would guess no. So I think that the smart move is probably doing what most teams do at the deadline, which is you trade pending free agents, and then try and go back at it with your core. And I think that's where it's going to be. So it may not lead to the sexiest trades, at least in terms of prospect return, but I think it's the right way to go about it if you're keeping this core together or plan to keep it together beyond the next year.
Yeah, Mike, and that's the big question, I guess, is that you've got these two players who've been the foundation of your core in Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette, and obviously this year it seems like a no-brainer that is the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. If you're going to pick one of the two to stick with, Guerrero Jr. would be the guy. He's having a heck of a year, at least a bounce-back year in some ways. Bo Bichette's gone the other way and sort of fallen through the floor, what we expected from him. How would you proceed if you're in that front office when it comes to the long-term commitment you're willing to make to both of those players who've been sort of the linchpin of your foundation? How do you look at those two guys?
Well, first, I think if I were in that front office, I would do everything I could to try and repair my relationship with the city of Toronto and its fans, because they really have done a terrible job of that.
Yes.
I think you guys would probably agree with that, right? That it's like nobody seems to believe anything that comes out of anybody's mouth there. It's remarkable. I mean, it's unbelievable. For guys who, like, I've known Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins for years. I think they're good guys. at least in my dealings with them, I just think that they just didn't have a feel for what Toronto. I don't think they knew that Toronto, like that they didn't appreciate how intense a sports market it is, that it's much closer to being New York than it is to, Cleveland or Detroit or some of those cities that it feels like it should fit with more geographically, right? So the first thing I do is try to repair that. And I think one of the ways you can do that is by extending those guys. I agree. Bichette's falling through the floor this year has been unbelievable, but guys are allowed to have bad years as far as I'm concerned. And I think Bo Bichette is a way better player than what he's shown this season. I don't think shortstop is his best position. They probably should think about moving him to a different one. And whether it's because, Leo Jimenez is able to handle shortstop, or they can find somebody else who can play the position better defensively, and he might be a better fit at third or second. I think all of that should be on the table, but I think extending Bo Bichette should be priority one, and priority one either A or priority one adjacent should be extending Vlad Guerrero Jr. Because I just don't think that you find young talents like this very often. And it's not like we're talking about extending 31-year-old guys, right? Like, these are young players. These are the kind of guys that you build around. These are the kind of guys that Rodgers should have been keeping his powder dry for, so that they can extend. They're core players, and they're players that have a connection to the community. So for me, if I were in charge, first of all, I think I would have fostered a better relationship with Jays fans. But the other part is I would keep my star players that are that young. This isn't Cleveland, it's Toronto. Mm-hmm. Like, keep them around, because they're really important pieces for you going forward. And it makes building a lot easier if you have a number 3 and number 4 hitter that are under contract for a long time.
Mike, I can guarantee you'd have a better relationship with the fan base than Ross and Mark do at the moment. And it's a low bar.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's something, all right. And there's been a lot of GM talk and focus on, who's going to essentially replace Ross Atkins. But that's not what I'm going to ask you. I want to go in another direction within the division. And Juan Soto is saying all the things that a pending free agent often will say, and probably should say, that you don't know what the future is going to have in store for me. Hey, I would love to play with a guy like Shohei Otani because it's Shohei Otani, and I guess the Dodgers maybe could afford Juan Soto. But if you're the Yankees, how much urgency is there on this deadline and this season, given the fact that outside of Soto and Judge, this has not been a great lineup this year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they really look at him being a pending free agent as a significant deadline. I mean, I think you can rewind to Aaron Judge's free agency to see that, right? Like, the Giants were pretty serious. They were close enough that John Heyman misspelled his name and said that Arson Judge was going to the Giants, right? Like, they were that far along in the discussions before the Yankees swooped in and kept him. And I think in the end, that's what the financial largesse of a club like the Yankees can do is we don't have to worry about it. We'll let the market set the dollar figure for him, and whatever it is, we'll match or exceed it. And so I don't think that they're particularly worried about it, even though Hal Steinbrenner, their owner, said earlier this year that, he would consider an extension before the end of the season, which is something the Yankees really have not done. They didn't even do it with Jeter, like twice. They did contract extensions with Jeter after the season was over, once when he was a free agent. So I'm not sure that the Yankees are very concerned about it. I really don't think that Soto is going to be in play for anybody else. I think he's going to end up being a Yankee for a long time. But you're right in that they have more serious concerns for their offense in that, like the last 2 years, it's been Aaron Judge carrying it, and at least they've got somebody there to help him shoulder the load. But, man, the pieces around him just have not performed well for, close to 2 months now.
Hey, Mike, we're not too far away from the Summer Olympics in Paris kicking off. What did you think of Rob Manfred today talking about the prospect of Major League Baseball players competing at the 2028 Summer Olympics when they're held in Los Angeles? I guess they're talking about a potential, instead of an all-star break, you'd have something like a 10-day to 2-week break where the Major League Baseball players would take a break from Major League Baseball and head to the 5-ring circus out in L.A. What do you make of it?
So it's interesting. I had a conversation with somebody at Major League Baseball Players Association last week where we were just kind of, not to get dire here, but looking ahead to the next collective bargaining agreement, which ends at the end of 26. And as I was asking him what some of the issues would be, and he said, well, one of them is probably the Olympics. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. He's like, I think that there's a desire for players to compete in it. The question is how we build the schedule, right? Are there going to be a lot of double headers? Are you still going to try and play 162? The players don't want any reduction in pay if they back off the number of games and if they shut down for 10 days. So there's a lot of logistical questions, but it does feel like there is momentum for that. I have to think that some of that is because players have gotten much more excited about playing in the World Baseball Classic. And I think you guys have watched that event grow now over the last, close to 20 years. And the difference between the first one, which is kind of this weird curiosity, to now, which is like, this is an incredible, intense event. And, getting a chance to be at the games in Phoenix and then the games in Miami for the out-rounds last year was pretty spectacular. And so there's a chance to be able to do that and win an Olympic gold medal. I mean, that's really special, I think, for a number of players. So I'm not all that surprised. There has been a little bit of a push. There have been some prominent agents that are working with the LA committee to try and push for that. I think the Olympics would be far more interested in baseball long term if star players were able to participate in it. Even if you did it in lieu of an all-star game, let's say, I think it would be a remarkably fun event to have in the middle of summer. So I'm not surprised it came up. I'm not surprised that the league is open to it. I think they see it as a way to get international growth. I'm not really all that surprised the players are open to it. I mean, they're going to need to be some level of financial compensation, you would think, for it. But I think it has a chance to be really cool to be able to allow players, the active major league players, to compete in the Olympics for their country. And I mean, incredible. I think back to what, 92 was like with the Dream Team, right? And the first time we saw NBA players competing in the Olympics and how incredible that was. I mean, we've never had that in baseball. And I think it's a big reason why baseball has just been an experimental sport, over the last, close to 20 plus years. We had it in Atlanta, really was the last time. And I guess in Athens, and then it's been out except for, Tokyo, where, baseball is huge in Japan. So I'm all in favor of it. I think it would be a really, really cool event. I'm just kind of curious to see how it would impact the season, but man, that could be really special. It might be the only time it ever happens. So let's take advantage of it.
Yeah. Sign me up. I think most fans would agree with that. It'd be great to see the Stars competing for an Olympic gold. Mike, we appreciate.
Can we get Ernie Witt back to coach Team C for that?
He's a staple. He's a lifetime contract, I think. Get him, Larry Walker. Awesome. Yeah, for sure. Mike, enjoy the All-Star game tonight. We appreciate you joining us here on OverDrive.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Take care.
There you have it. Mike Ferrin from MLB Network Radio, and you just automatically think of hockey and how they have the World Baseball Classic already.
Yeah,
which is a revenue generating event for Major League Baseball.
Sure.
That's what the NHL wants. and the Olympics. So like baseball already has that part. And then the Olympics, as you point out, it'd probably be a one-off considering the next Olympics are in Brisbane.
Yes.
And I can't imagine baseball players in the middle of their season going to Australia and then coming back, but
seems like a stretch, but LA seems like it could
oh
be
yeah,
fit.
that's easy. Like
Yeah.
You have Dodger Stadium, you have the Angel Stadium.
Right.
You know, how many more do you need? They'll find it. Like that's
Yeah, I'm sure you got a ton of college stadiums that are very impressive as well if you need extra stadiums for practice and other games. But no, it's an intriguing possibility, right?
Yeah.
Like it'd be a lot of fun. And I just, like as Mike said, there's a lot of logistical hurdles there. How do you sort of work it into a 162 game regular season? How do you stop for in the middle of summer and then kind of finish the World Series before winter is the question.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, good point. Our Olympic gold medalist when it comes to covering the CFL and the NFL is Dave Naylor.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, and he's going to join us coming up with the latest on the Edmonton Elks and firing Chris Jones. NFL training camps kicking off soon. That and much more. Overdrive continuing on TSN 1050, the TSN app, and also on TSN 2. Overdrive continuing on TSN 1050, the TSN app, and up on TSN 2. Mark Rowe in for Brian Hayes this week alongside Dave Feschuk from the Toronto Star. Overdrive brought to you by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. Our football insider, Dave Naylor, will join us in a couple of minutes as we get into both leagues. The CFL underway in their regular season. The NFL is always underway. We just saw Brandon Aiyuk is demanding a trade. And the 49ers saying, we're not going to give you a trade.
No. So kind of like that's what the NFL does at this time of year, right? It's just, but you're right. It's a 365 operation, the news cycle that is the NFL.
Yeah. Dave is there, our football insider. Dave Naylor joining us on Overdrive. How's it going, Dave?
Very well, gentlemen. How about yourselves?
We're good. It's a great time to chat with someone like you because not only is the CFL, in full swing, but you're going to spend a big chunk of your summer at NFL training camps. And obviously, I want to get to the news with the Edmonton Elks and the Argos coming off a big win, but because it's pretty topical right now, Brandon Aiyuk is demanding a trade. I think a lot of people expected that to happen because of really, I guess it comes down to the salary cap. He wants to get paid, and there's only so many guys that you can pay. But the Buffalo Bills need a wide receiver. I'm sure you're going to be hanging out with that organization a lot this summer. How do you see this playing out?
I don't think they're going to trade him. And I think if they were going to trade a player, I think it might be Deebo Samuel. And look, this is leverage time, right? Mm-hmm. And we're a week away from the start of training camp. No one's losing anything. Veteran players don't mind missing training camp, as we've known, and training camp itself has kind of become more meaningless over the years as the preseason games matter less and the NFL calendar fills up with OTAs and other things where teams, players spend a lot of time together in the offseason, a lot more than they used to, in decades past and things like that. So, and look, this has been a pressure point. This is one that I think a lot of people have looked at and seen that he's a guy who's, undervalued, at least in the economics of the NFL. But, ultimately the Niners have the cards here. And I don't think we're going to see it moved. And, you mentioned Buffalo, and look, every receiver who was potentially on the move this offseason at one time or another was linked to the Buffalo Bills. Right. But I think the Bills have actually a really intriguing receiving group. And I don't think I'm being Pollyanna when I say I think it could be a really good group. And look, everybody has in their mind what Stephon Diggs has been in his career, whether it was a Viking or a Bill. But if you follow him over the last 12 games of last season, and like in football, that's a large sample size. In hockey, that's not a huge sample size. In baseball, that's not even a sample size. But in football, that's a lot. And there were two stats about Stephon Diggs that jumped out at me during last year that I cannot get out of my head. Okay, on December 10th, the Bills played at Kansas City in a must-win game, and they won it by 3 at Arrowhead. And then, of course, in the second round of the playoffs, the divisional round of the playoffs, they hosted Kansas City and lost by a field goal. So they had a 3-point win at Kansas City and a 3-point loss at Buffalo. Stephon Diggs did not have 25 yards receiving in either of those games. Like the biggest games on the Bills' calendars. Mm-hmm. And, the one where you need him to show up. And, of course, he had the infamous drop in the playoff game. But I think Buffalo has a really interesting mix. And when you look at, Curtis Samuel, and you look at Khalil Shakir, and you look at Mac Hollins, and Chase Claypool, Chase Claypool, I believe, is about to turn 26. There's no reason why he can't be a very good NFL player again. I won't say great, but very good NFL player. He's not old. He's never suffered a major injury. I mean, I think he's a candidate for a bounce back. You've got Marquez Valdez-Scantling there. And, of course, they took a receiver with their first pick. I think it's going to be a very, very different distribution of targets. You're not going to have one guy that you've got to satisfy with, 12, 14 targets a game. And the guy who might lead them in targets is their tight end, Dalton Kincaid, their second-year tight end. So I actually don't think the Bills are in the market for receiver. I actually think they have a decent mix.
Okay, speaking of the receiver market, Naylor, the other big drama that seems to be unfolding, may or may not be unfolding, surrounds Davante Adams. Yeah. We've heard Aaron Rodgers, he was out at Lake Tahoe at the Century Celebrity Golf Challenge talking about how he can't wait to play with Davante again. We see this Netflix series where Davante Adams is featured saying, I got to get out of Las Vegas before I get killed because he's getting hit so hard. And he's obviously underperformed to the statistical expectation he's set while playing with Aaron Rodgers. What do you make of all this around Davante Adams, and what are the odds he's not a Las Vegas Raider for long?
Now, that one makes a little more sense to me because I believe Davante Adams is on the other side of 30. Mm-hmm. And if you look at where the Raiders are kind of in their development, does having a big money, big receiver who's on the other side of 30 really make that much sense on that team? And the other thing is, never mind, not to dismiss what he said on the Netflix, or some of the stuff he said at the podium during last season, which was basically, he said the kind of things you never hear athletes say, which is basically, it's not all about team. A lot of it's about me.
Exactly.
I always have a theory, right, about why this is always about receivers, right? Whether it's Stephon Diggs or Davante Adams or, historically we can know through all. Why is it always receivers who have this? And I think it really, when you think about the game, it kind of makes sense, right? Think of every position on the field, okay? Defensive guys respond to what happens, okay? They depending on how much play they get in the game, it's all dependent on what happens around them. Offensive linemen block, running backs get their carries, tight ends block and release. And there's only one group that is kind of dependent. If they don't get the love, they feel insecure. That's receivers. It's the nature of the position. Like I mentioned that I think the Bills are kind of relieved of the burden of having to make sure Stephon Diggs gets his targets, whether or not he deserves them or not. But, look, I could see the Davante Adams. I know his agent came out today and said, look, there has never been any trade talk. And Aaron Rodgers, lit the fire, I would say, intentionally, given, the way he does things, basically saying he's looking forward to playing with him again. But that one does make some sense because the Jets are the weirdest team in the NFL, right? They're a team that hasn't been to the playoffs in forever, and yet it's a Super Bowl or bust year. Like, what is that?
Yeah, right.
We've never seen that before. And so, I have a lot of doubts about Aaron Rodgers is going to be as a football player just because, that playing at his age and missing a year and not being that great the last time you did play a full season, I think when you compound those things, it's a really bold assumption that we're going to see the Aaron Rodgers we're used to seeing. Mm-hmm. But that one makes some more sense to me just because we know Aaron Rodgers has huge influence on the Jets. We know they do things that he wants them to do, that you're basically in with him or you're not. And Davante Adams doesn't make a lot of sense for the Raiders. And as you say, he hasn't been productive since he's been there. He hasn't been happy there. I don't think they're going to be a great team. There's all kinds of reasons why the Niners wouldn't want to part with Brandon Aiyuk, but I can see all kinds of reasons why the Raiders would want to part with Davante Adams.
Yeah, and this is why your job, especially early on, is so fun because you get to go to training camp and players are a little more accessible and you get some great storylines to get us ready for week one, which is coming sooner rather than later. So we're looking forward to that. But I do want to switch gears to the CFL. And big news earlier this week with the firing of Chris Jones out in Edmonton. And what's the more important question here, Dave, is it why can't Edmonton figure things out and be successful? Or why hasn't Chris Jones been able to be the success that he was earlier in his career?
Well, I think I can answer them kind of both in the same answer. And actually, it's an interesting tidbit about Chris Jones. I used to use this line about Chris Jones all the time, and I can never use it. Because Chris Jones has been in the league, I think, since 2001, 2002. He's been a position coach. He's been a DC all over the place. He's been a head coach 3 times. And, the CFL is a league that, they move on from coaches pretty quickly. It kind of sometimes can feel like coaches are disposable. Chris Jones, in his entire CFL career, had never been fired or part of a staff that was fired.
Wow.
That was when I used to trot out, and people were like, wow, you're right. Like, and now, of course, he has been. Look, here's the thing. The CFL has a football operations cap. About 5 years ago, they were looking at the rate of growth of coaches' salaries. They were looking at teams that had 2 and 3 coaches on the payroll at the same time because of guys they fired or GMs. And it was an expense category that was out of control, they felt. And in a league like the CFL where the margins are smaller, that was an area the league addressed. And they brought in an operations cap. And they basically have, when you fire a coach or a GM, you get one freebie every 5 years. If that guy's got 2 years left on his deal, you can just ignore it, erase it, pay it. It doesn't come up off your operations cap. But the Edmonton Elks, back after 2021, fired both their coach and their GM with 2 years remaining on their deal. And I believe they'd already used their mulligan. So when they hired Chris Jones, he's head coach, GM, and defensive coordinator. And basically with no oversight. And the history of football, not just in this instance, but in general, that when you kind of hand the keys to one guy, think Chip Kelly with the Eagles years ago. I mean, all kinds of examples. It generally doesn't work out. Chris Jones has been a really good head coach when he was at Edmonton before, and Ed Hervey was his GM. But ultimately, talking to people who've been involved in that situation with him, they just felt like he had too much on his plate. He had too much control. There wasn't enough oversight. And that ultimately, the things that he was really good at, he wasn't flourishing at because he was trying to do too much. But ultimately, 8-33, it's a franchise that was, the gold standard. Not just like they're losing on the field. You've seen what the attendance looks like when you see the games on television there. And there's a new owner coming in. I think there's an announcement coming. They were about a month away from an announcement of a new owner. This is a team that's been community-owned for 75 years, right? It's the whole kind of prairie spirit. The community owns the team. No, they're coming in with a private owner. And this has been in the works really since late last season. We've been kind of seeing it go this direction. So I'm curious to learn about that. And I guess if you're a new owner and you believe that when you take over a business, you can't take it any further down, maybe that's a good thing. Well, here, ladies and gentlemen, here they are, the Edmonton Elks, 8-33, missed the playoffs X number of years, had a 22-game home losing streak, and they're 0-6 this year. 0-6 with 4 straight 3-point losses, 3 of them off walk-off field goals, mind you. So it's not like this is a garbage team, but there is truly nowhere to go but up.
So if you're Jarius Jackson as the interim head coach, Naylor, what do you do here? What's the playbook for a team that's had so much misery? We know about the 22-game home losing streak that made headlines across North America because it hadn't been done in any sport, it seemed. Where do you go from here?
Well, I think you just got to remind your players that this is not a team that is, like the Elks of 2021 that lost 9 of their last 10 and such. This is not a team where you're not close, where you're getting out and you're embarrassing yourself every week. I mean, in week 1, they had a 10-point lead to Saskatchewan in the fourth quarter, and they blew it, right? And it's been close games. I mean, they had a game at Toronto where they scored 36 and lost. So
right.
So somebody, we were on our CFL and TSN conference call yesterday, and one of our producers had a great line. He said, if you had a bingo card for all the ways you could lose a football game, Chris Jones would have a chip on all over the bingo card, everywhere you can. It's really that. And it reminds me, Dave, of a story myself. When I remember when I was in second-year journalism school and I failed 5 straight assignments, and I went to see the prof, and he said, the good news is you haven't made the same mistake twice, and eventually you'll run out of mistakes you can make.
That's great.
And I honestly think the Edmonton Elks are like that. That they every week they find a new way. And eventually they're going to run out of ways to lose games. But if you're Jarius Jackson, I think you look at it and say, hey, we're close. We have not played a football game this season that we have not been in. Mm-hmm. We have not played a football game this season that we've not been in the fourth quarter. And I think you got to build off of that, because that's actually true. And there's 2 ways to read that when it comes to Chris Jones. One is you can say, well, why did you fire a coach who's stringing together a series of 3-point losses? That's 1 or 2 plays a game. But in and among those losses, I think there's lots of instances where you can look at it and say, boy, they took a dumb penalty there, or they had a player who didn't know he was supposed to do that, and ultimately, that's situational football, and that falls back on coaching.
Dave, I don't want to let you go before asking you about the Argos, who are coming off a huge victory over the Montreal Alouettes, handing the defending Grey Cup champions their first loss of the year. For the most part, this team has played well in the wake of the Chad Kelly situation. And has it maybe helped silence the chatter around whether or not Chad Kelly will play a game this year?
I think it's the Argos have purposely kept Chad Kelly out of sight. I mean, like, under his suspension, he could be practicing right now, and they've chosen not to have him practice. Like, he's suspended from games, not practices. But though I think they purposely wanted this story to cool down. And yeah, the fact that the team is above 500, I think has kind of played that down a little bit. Now, they go to Montreal last week. The opposing quarterback gets knocked out in the first half of the game or leaves in the first half. They get a defensive touchdown. They get a special teams touchdown. It was a bit of a perfect storm for the Argos, and I don't think they can count on that kind of game every time they play Montreal. But I think the next, between now and the next month or so, you've got to figure that, or even sooner than that, 2 or 3 weeks, at some point, we got to get some indication about where Chad Kelly is at this as he returned into practice. And Ryan Dinwiddie came out and, this line got some reaction, which, I thought it was pretty obvious that Chad Kelly's going to get his job back if and when he does comply with the league's requirements. He was the best player in the league last year, and Cameron Dukes is a gutsy player, but he's not Chad Kelly. He's not the guy who can stand in the pocket and sling it down the field the way Chad Kelly can. He's more of a point guard kind of quarterback, and he's at his best when he's doing that. So, I still think the Argos game plan had to be from the start, stay around 500 and, then make your push when Chad Kelly gets back. Well, that's kind of right the way the plan has gone to this point.
Awesome stuff as always, Dave. Appreciate you taking some time. Looking forward to your reports from NFL training camps and, of course, throughout the CFL season.
Yeah, I get to go to Jets next week. That should be fun.
Oh, there's nothing to talk about there. I can't imagine what's going to be your first story.
The circus in the Big Tent should be fun.
That's right. Awesome. Thanks, Dave. There's our TSN football insider, Dave Naylor, on covering both leagues, which is great for him because that man loves football and he gets to do it pretty much 12 months a year.
He does it well.
Yes, he does. I don't necessarily make the best bets, but I'll try to do well with the best bets, which is coming up.
Hey, don't undersell it.
I took Gunnar Henderson yesterday in the home run derby. I think he finished last.
Although his impersonation of Scooby-Doo was pretty on point.
That should give me something. I don't know what.
Yeah. He's talented. Yeah, not at hitting home runs off a batting practice pitcher.
That's right. Okay, so our FanDuel best bets coming up. We'll wrap up the show as OverDrive continues on TSN 1050, the TSN app, and on TSN 2. All right, today's best bets are powered by FanDuel. Make your picks and assemble a same-game parlay in seconds on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. We're going all baseball all-star here. I'm going to take the American League on the money line. The NL has won just 4 all-star games since 1997, and they won last year. So they've had theirs for a while. The American League is due to go on another run here. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to record a hit, and they've been some low-scoring games. As I looked back, I kind of forgot how many low score. You think of all-star games being in double digits, but they've really been low scoring. But I think we're due for a high scoring one, so I'm going to go over the 7.5 runs. Today's best bets are powered by FanDuel. The first inning means as much as the 9th when you bet baseball on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Please play responsibly, 19 plus, and physically located in Ontario. So hopefully it's a good game. Hopefully
we see Skenes versus Judge.
Yeah. That's Bruce Bochy is taking some shrapnel right now.
As he should.
Got it from you. Got it from Mike Ferrin, who we had on earlier.
Yeah, I'm glad Mike agreed. I've heard a lot of people, really saying come on, what are we doing here?
Well, and that was the whole thing about baseball. Come on, do the right thing and start Skenes in the game.
Right.
Which, thankfully, they did. Mm-hmm. And now it's another okay, and let's add to that.
The best power pitcher against the best power hitter. How about that?
Have a moment. Have a moment that will be on social media. Have a moment that will be on highlight shows.
Oh, well, maybe we'll get it. Maybe somebody will get a hit or a walk or get hit by a ball. Who knows? Weird things happen. It's baseball.
Yeah. Weird things do happen.
Although guys that generally throw 100 strike people out.
Yeah.
That seems to be what's happening. What is it? He's faced Skenes has faced 11 fellow All-Stars, and they're batting 156 against them.
Okay.
So it's I don't like their chances to get a hit.
Good job today. Hopefully you don't have to use the Lakeshore or the Gardner or the DVP.
Yeah.
It is all underwater. Drake's house is underwater, apparently.
If you got the option between the underpass and the overpass, take the overpass.
But you'll be... there's a video of Drake right now.
Is that Drake's house? Allegedly.
Allegedly. It's being reported. So,
okay.
Anyways,
he just built that place.
I know.
He's got to have a word with his contractor.
That's right. We'll be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. and we'll chat then.